Troy Donahue names the gay two actors of old Hollywood. He dated in secret. Troy Donahue, the name that once made Hollywood pause, was actually born with a very different one. Troy Donahue, originally Merle Johnson Jr., was born on January 27, 1936, in New York City, into a comfortable family shaped by two very different worlds: the stage lights that surrounded his actress mother and the discipline of his corporate executive father. He studied journalism at Columbia University, but Hollywood's pull was far stronger. When Warner Brothers signed him in the late 1950s, they also gave him a new identity: Troy Donahue, a name that quickly took over magazine covers, theater marquees, and the hearts of millions. In 1959, with A Summer Place, Donahue became a sensation. Starring opposite Sandra Dee, he brought to life a romance that was gentle, forbidden, and impossible for audiences to look away from. His soft blue eyes and dreamy charm turned him into an icon of his generation, while the film's haunting theme song became forever tied to his image. Yet behind all the bright lights, Donahue kept certain truths to himself, including the fact that he had secretly dated two male actors from old Hollywood. Those hidden pieces of his past, quietly tucked away, make his story even more intriguing today. Behind that polished exterior, behind the golden boy America thought they understood, Troy Donahue lived a life far more complex than any studio press release ever hinted at. Beneath the charm and the immaculate image lay secrets he guarded fiercely, truths shared only with a few trusted souls. Among them was a revelation he never dared expose at the height of his fame: his clandestine relationships with two well-known male actors, romances hidden in the shadows of an unforgiving Hollywood. In the early 1960s, Donahue's rise wasn't just quick, it was incandescent. One film after another lifted him higher: Parish, 1961, Susan Slade, 1961, Rome Adventure, 1962, Palm Springs Weekend, 1963. On screen, he radiated a soft heroism, gentle, noble, effortlessly magnetic. He could be wounded without seeming weak, desirable without ever trying. Hollywood didn't just cast him as a romantic lead, they molded an entire ideal around him. His image resonated perfectly with pre-Vietnam America, a country bathed in Kennedy-era optimism, young, shiny, and full of promise. At his peak, Donahue received more fan letters than almost anyone at Warner Brothers. His face dominated the covers of Photoplay, Teen Beat, and every magazine that fed teenage fantasies. For a moment, he wasn't simply a star, he was the blueprint. But the world was shifting. By the late 1960s, Hollywood was craving grit, authenticity, and conflict. The glossy, clean-cut heartthrob suddenly felt like a remnant of a vanished era. Roles dried up. The spotlight cooled. And as Troy Donahue's public image began to fade, the private life he had kept so carefully hidden only grew more mysterious, leaving behind questions that still entice curiosity today. As Troy Donahue's career began to falter, the ground beneath him shifted in ways he could never have predicted. He fought to reinvent himself in a Hollywood that had moved on, its old studio machinery collapsing while a new cultural wave swept the industry into unfamiliar territory. Behind the glossy posters and polished smiles of his former life, Donahue was waging a private war, one marked by pressure, disillusionment, and a slow, painful unraveling hidden far from the cameras. Through the 1970s and 1980s, the contrast between who he had been and who he had become grew unbearably sharp. Alcoholism closed in on him, tightening its grip as financial troubles pulled him into places no former idol imagined standing. At his lowest, he slept in his car, drifting between makeshift refuges, an image so stark it almost seemed unreal for a man who once symbolized American perfection. Yet even then, Donahue refused to hide. He confronted his addictions head-on, walked into Alcoholics Anonymous with humility, and began the slow process of rebuilding a life he had nearly destroyed. Sobriety didn't just save him, it gave him a renewed sense of purpose. And remarkably, it was this unvarnished honesty that brought people back to him. Fans who had once adored the blue-eyed golden boy now found something more compelling: resilience. Hollywood noticed too, if only in small ways. Donahue resurfaced in guest spots on The Love Boat and Chips, and later delivered a sly, self-aware cameo in John Waters' Crybaby, 1990, a playful twist that allowed him to wink at the very teen idol myth that had once defined him. These later appearances allowed Troy Donahue to face his past without flinching, to laugh at it, embrace it, and carry it with a kind of quiet dignity. At nostalgia conventions, he wasn't met with pity but with genuine affection. Fans of every age lined up to tell him how his films had shaped their youth, their memories, even their lives. And Donahue, ever gracious, met each one with that familiar blend of charm, humility, and self-deprecating humor, the same qualities that had helped him survive every high and low. Troy Donahue, once one of the defining matinee idols of the late 1950s and early 1960s, lived a life far more layered than the swooning romantic roles that made him famous. Behind the effortlessly handsome facade was a man battered by 4 marriages, private struggles, emotional reinventions, and relationships that carried the full weight of his journey, from meteoric rise to devastating collapse and, ultimately, hard-earned redemption. His first and most publicized marriage was to actress Suzanne Pleshette, later beloved for The Bob Newhart Show. The two met while filming Rome Adventure in 1964, and their chemistry was immediate, both on-screen and off. A whirlwind romance led to a January wedding that electrified Hollywood. But just as quickly as it began, it unraveled. 9 months later, the marriage ended under the catch-all phrase of irreconcilable differences. Though brief, it became one of the most talked-about chapters of Donahue's private life, a union many believed faltered under career pressures and the early cracks forming in his personal stability. Even before Pleshette, Donahue's romantic life had stirred headlines. His engagement to Swedish-American actress and model Lily Cardell ended in scandal when she filed a lawsuit accusing him of assault. While no criminal charges were filed, the accusation exploded across tabloids and struck directly at the carefully crafted, clean-cut heartthrob image the studios had built around him. For many, it was the first troubling hint that beneath Troy Donahue's golden exterior lay storms the public knew nothing about, whispers that would trail him for years to come. Troy Donahue made another attempt at rebuilding his personal life when he married actress Valerie Allen on October 21, 1966. Allen, already familiar to audiences through her film and television roles, seemed at first to offer the stability Donahue so desperately needed. For a brief moment, their marriage looked like a fresh start, something steady, something hopeful. But behind the closed doors of their home, cracks appeared almost immediately. By 1968, just 2 years later, Allen filed for divorce, citing cruelty. The details never reached the public, but the court documents suggested a turbulent household shaped by Donahue's deepening addiction and increasingly unpredictable behavior. Seeking escape from the pressures of the industry, Donahue tried again, this time with someone entirely outside Hollywood. His third marriage, to Alma Sharp, an executive secretary far removed from the entertainment world, began on November 15, 1969. The timing was striking. Donahue's once blazing career had begun to fade, and Sharp was often seen as a grounding presence, someone who offered him the normalcy he craved as fame slipped through his fingers. Yet even the quiet of a non-Hollywood life couldn't protect them from the turmoil within. After 3 years, in 1972, the marriage collapsed. Friends later recalled that Donahue's ongoing struggle with substance abuse, and his painful adjustment to a life no longer illuminated by studio lights, played a decisive role in their split. His fourth and final marriage, to Vicki Taylor, lasted from 1979 to 1981, during a period when Donahue had already retreated almost entirely from the public eye. His roles were sporadic, his appearances fleeting. Little is known about Taylor or the inner workings of their relationship, but what is clear is that this marriage, like the ones before it, was strained by distance, instability, and emotional exhaustion. And after just 2 years, it too ended in divorce, another chapter in a life marked by dazzling highs, shattering lows, and the relentless search for something steady in a world that rarely offered it. These brief and turbulent unions came to define much of Troy Donahue's private world, a man endlessly searching for connection, yet repeatedly undone by the weight of his own demons. But later in life, something in him softened. After decades marked by addiction, financial ruin, and the lingering ache of a vanished fame, Donahue found what many believed to be his most grounding relationship, a quiet, steady companionship with Jen Chow, a Chinese-American mezzo-soprano celebrated for her powerful stage presence and commanding voice. With her, Donahue seemed to discover not the explosive passion Hollywood loved to script, but a gentler, deeper bond, one built on peace, tenderness, and understanding. Though they never married, those closest to Donahue knew that his relationship with Jen Chow held a significance unlike anything before it. Friends said she gave him stability after years defined by chaos, offering comfort as his health declined and as he finally confronted the emotional aftermath of everything he had survived. Donahue also entered fatherhood in a way he never expected. In 1969, a brief relationship resulted in the birth of his son, Sean, though Donahue wouldn't learn the truth until years later. By the time the revelation reached him, Sean was already an adult. Their eventual meeting left a deep imprint on Donahue, a man long haunted by regrets and missed chances. Reconnecting with his son offered him something rare, a sense of legacy, and a small but meaningful chance to repair what life had once taken from him. As Troy Donahue stepped into the twilight of his life, the golden-haired idol of the 1950s and 1960s began to shed the layers he had guarded so tightly. The charming, clean-cut heartthrob, adored by millions, had always been a carefully preserved illusion. And behind it stood a man shaped by contradictions, vulnerability, and long-buried truths that only emerged when fame no longer demanded his perfection. And buried among the many truths Troy Donahue finally allowed himself to speak, one stood out as the most shocking, the secret he had carried in silence through the brightest years of his fame. In the twilight of his life, Donahue quietly admitted that he had been romantically involved with several gay actors of old Hollywood, relationships so dangerous, so unthinkable for the era, that even the faintest whisper could have destroyed him. The Hollywood of the 1950s wasn't simply traditional, it was suffocating. Studios controlled every breath their stars took. Anything that hinted at queerness wasn't just frowned upon, it was career-ending. And so Donahue, like many others, lived behind a carefully curated illusion. In a few rare, almost reluctant interviews during the 1990s, when the industry was finally beginning to confront its buried past, he confessed that, as a young actor, he had quietly dated men. Not just actors, but stars. Leading men adored by millions, shielded by studio fantasies, and terrified of the truth. It was the 50s, he reportedly said. You could lose everything. Studios owned your image. If they found out, they'd ruin you. Among the names Donahue allegedly revealed, one eclipsed all the rest, spoken with a mix of admiration, longing, and a sorrow that never quite left his voice. Anthony Perkins, the brilliant, haunted actor forever etched into history as Norman Bates in Psycho. According to Donahue, their relationship was intense, emotionally charged, and cloaked in fear from the very beginning. They first met at a Hollywood party in the late 1950s, both hovering on the brink of superstardom. Donahue, the sunlit all-American idol, Perkins, the brooding, fragile talent who mesmerized critics. Their connection was immediate, electric, undeniable, and doomed. We could never be seen together. Ever, Donahue later confided. We had to pretend. Always pretend. So they built themselves a hidden world. They met in the safe living rooms of trusted friends. They slipped away to the coastline after midnight, long after the city had gone quiet. Under the cover of darkness, beneath the hum of the Pacific, they talked for hours or simply sat together in silence, the waves their only witnesses, the night their only protection. There was a gentleness to him, Donahue would recall years later. He knew what it felt like to live behind a mask. And then he revealed something even more astonishing, an unspoken, quietly electric connection with Rock Hudson, the very embodiment of American masculinity, the studio-manufactured ideal of the perfect leading man. Donahue never claimed a full romance, but he remembered the spark, the tension, the immediate recognition between two men hiding the same dangerous truth. Rock carried a heavier burden than any of us, Donahue later admitted. He was larger than life. One misstep and the whole illusion would crash. But there were moments, brief, private moments, when we shared something no one else could see. We were the dream America wanted, and we were terrified of losing everything. His confessions weren't meant to shock or expose. They were pieces of a long, difficult life, spoken softly in the years after he had survived addiction, homelessness, and the painful climb towards self-acceptance. By then, Donahue had no reason left to protect the fantasy Hollywood built around him. He wanted, finally, to reclaim the parts of himself he had been forced to hide. Donahue's honesty opened a rare, deeply human glimpse into the hidden world of closeted Hollywood, an era when studios controlled every breath their stars took, when vulnerability was punished, and authenticity could destroy a career overnight. His memories weren't acts of betrayal. They were acknowledgments of men like Anthony Perkins and Rock Hudson, trapped inside identities crafted by others, quietly longing for something real. In speaking their names, Donahue wasn't revealing scandals. He was honoring a generation of men who were denied the simplest human freedom, to love openly, without fear, without pretending. Troy Donahue's final chapter wasn't grand or cinematic. It unfolded quietly, almost tenderly, like the closing scene of a film meant only for those who truly understood him. By the early 2000s, he had become a living bridge between Hollywood's golden age and a modern world finally coming to terms with the secrets that era forced its stars to carry. Behind the glossy magazine covers and the sunlit image of the perfect 1950s heartthrob was a man who had spent decades trying to make peace with the shadows he once lived in. On August 30, 2001, inside his Santa Monica apartment, just a short walk from the shoreline he loved, Donahue collapsed from a massive heart attack. For years he had fought his way back from the darkness of addiction, embracing sobriety and the gentle clarity it brought him. Friends said he'd grown hopeful again, even considering small acting roles that might let him return to the screen quietly, gracefully, far from the frenzy that once defined him. Emergency responders rushed him to St. John's Health Center, the same sanctuary where so many Hollywood icons had sought help in their most fragile hours. Doctors moved fast, performing an emergency angioplasty to open his blocked arteries. For a moment, it looked like he had survived the worst. He was stable. Those gathered at his bedside felt the first flicker of cautious hope. But fate intervened. Only hours later, Donahue suffered a second, far more devastating heart attack. The medical team made the urgent choice to attempt a coronary artery bypass, a grueling, high-stakes surgery meant to reroute the failing pathways of his heart. On September 1st, surgeons worked relentlessly to save him. But his body, already weakened by 2 severe cardiac shocks, couldn't endure the fight. On September 2, 2001, at just 65 years old, Troy Donahue slipped away, surrounded not by fame or flashbulbs, but by people who loved him for the quiet kindness that had remained long after the spotlight dimmed. His passing closed the book on a life shaped by meteoric fame, painful downfall, hard-won sobriety, and quiet redemption. The world no longer saw him as the golden-haired dreamboat pinned to bedroom walls, yet the outpouring of condolences that followed his death proved just how deeply he had imprinted himself on American culture. To millions, he remained the symbol of a gentler Hollywood, blue-eyed, hopeful, and forever young in the glow of the silver screen.